The stars had never looked colder. Sergeant Cale Draven lay flat on the jagged crest of a ridge, his body molded to the stone like it belonged there. His rifle, long as a man and older than most ships in the sector, rested silent in his grip. Beneath him, Outpost V-91 slept, or rather, waited to die. There wasn't much left of the human presence in the Rigel sector. The last resupply had come 17 months ago. The last transmission from Central Command had been 2 weeks after that, garbled and half-drowned in static, but clear enough to convey the message. Earth was gone. Cale hadn't moved since then. He didn't need orders. Orders were for men hoping to survive. He was past hope. The wind clawed across the barren moon, dragging dust like ash over the cracked surface. This place had never been alive, but Cale had walked its cliffs long enough to hear its whispers. And now, it whispered again. They were coming. He saw them before the sensors did. Flashes in the upper atmosphere, too deliberate to be meteorites, too erratic for civilian traffic. Drop pods. Thousands. Cale breathed once. That was all. He rolled onto his side, fingers dancing over the rugged interface of his field module. A swarm of blips appeared on the cracked display, each one a signal flare of enemy life. 6,000 Varn Dominion soldiers descending like locusts, confident in their superiority, ignorant of what waited in the dust. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile, had it not been buried under weeks of stubble and bitterness. 6,001. In another life, Cale had been a man of precision, of purpose. Top of his class at Sol Academy. Decorated twice before his 20th birthday. But wars grind down even the sharpest blades. His old team, Sigma Black, had vanished into the void during the siege of Bellin Prime. Cale alone had walked out of that furnace, dragging 3 corpses and a datapack with the enemy's encryption keys. He hadn't spoken to anyone since. But he had killed. A flick of his wrist and his scope whirred to life, syncing with neural implants that tingled behind his right eye. He scanned the horizon, noting wind vectors, temperature shifts, magnetic fluctuations, every detail catalogued, processed, absorbed. There was no room for nerves. Not anymore. The first pod slammed into the far valley with a burst of silver steam. Then another. Then dozens. The Varn had a flair for spectacle. Their soldiers wore exo-armor molded in ceremonial shapes, all gleaming crests and inlaid optics, as if war were a parade. Cale watched them fan out, tight formations slicing across the terrain. Their efficiency was undeniable. But they had no cover, no elevation, no knowledge of what this moon could do. He whispered into his throat mic, barely audible. Nest 1, live. A tremor ran beneath him as his AI-augmented drones booted up, each buried in sand, mimicking heat signatures and broadcasting false sensor readings. Let them chase ghosts. Cale reached into the trench beside him and lifted the heart of his vengeance. His sniper rifle, the Anvil M3. Custom stock, triple-barreled, capable of atmospheric compensation and plasma-round burst. She purred as he primed her. She remembered. He didn't wear a helmet. Just a patch over one ear and a thin lens across his eye. The Varn liked flashy kills. Cale preferred silence. He centered his scope on the lead formation. A captain, perhaps. The armor bore high crest markers and a ceremonial blade across the back. Varn officers liked to be seen. Cale's finger tightened. The plasma bolt tore through the air, invisible until impact. The officer's helmet crumpled inward, a geyser of violet mist erupting as the body dropped. No sound. Just sudden absence. The Varn froze. Another shot. A medic this time. Then a comms specialist. Panic-fractured formation. They shouted over open channels, voices pitched with confusion. Cale listened, noting accents, cadence, fear. He moved before they could respond, sliding back through a narrow trench he dug weeks ago. It wound down into the ravine, leading to a secondary nest camouflaged beneath a cluster of radar-deflecting minerals. His boots made no sound. Even gravity seemed reluctant to challenge him. By the time the Varn located his former position, he was already watching them from a different angle. He fired again. And again. They never saw the barrel. Only the dead. He remembered Earth's final broadcast. The way the transmission had stuttered, caught in its own death rattle. There had been screaming in the background, then static. Cale had held his breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to cut in. No one did. So he buried the silence in gunfire. 300 soldiers lay dead by the end of the first hour. And still they came. The Dominion's high command must have believed it was a malfunction. A freak system anomaly. A minefield, perhaps. But their tech couldn't identify any such signatures. The moon was clean. Supposedly empty. Until now. Cale leaned against a cold rock wall, sliding in a new plasma cartridge. His hands moved automatically. No tremor, no hesitation. His body had long since learned the rhythm of death. His mind wandered elsewhere. Memories of Terran sunrises, the smell of sea salt, a laugh he hadn't heard in years. He shook them off like dust. Not now. The sound of marching filled the canyon. Another wave. He checked his counter. 4 nests remained operational. Drones were on low power, but still functional. Ammunition was low, but it always was. He tapped into the Varn's tactical feed again, grinning as their commander barked in guttural frustration. The alien voice echoed through the valley. You are one. We are thousands. Surrender, and your end will be swift. Cale closed his eyes. Listened to the wind. Then he whispered, Come find me. He took position, fingers steady. The storm had only just begun. The first wave died faster than the Varn command could log the casualty. Ammunition was low, bodies lay scattered across the jagged plains. He tapped into the Varn's tactical feet again, with surgical precision. Grinning as their commander barked in guttural frustration. Craters. The alien voice echoed through the valley, tainted the thin air. You are one. Above, we are the sky swirled with violet clouds, and your end will be the velocity of drop pods. Cale closed his eyes, still raining down. Listen to the wind. Draven didn't blink. Then he whispered, "Didn't breathe heavy. Come find me." He adjusted position, his scope, fingers steady. The flailing Varn storm had only just to drag their wounded captain behind a fractured rock outcropping, and ended him with a single shot to the spine. The squad froze, then ran. They would learn that running was louder than silence. His rifle recharged with a rising hum, the cooling unit venting mist around the barrel like steam from a dragon's nostrils. In the few seconds between shots, Cale's eyes danced across the valley, calculating trajectories, light reflection, terrain slope, and wind shear. The world was a math problem, and he was solving it with blood. He triggered a command through his neural link. Dozens of heat signatures lit up on the Varn HUDs, decoys, moving erratically, mimicking the biosignatures of an entire regiment. Panic spread like static across the alien frequency bands. Units fired blindly into shadows, while Cale watched from an unseen perch, his camouflage cloaking him against the thermal spectrum. He chose his next target not for tactical value, but for psychology. A Varn morale officer stood atop a transport, broadcasting rally cries in 5 dialects. Cale had studied those dialects during his first years in the Terran Military Academy. He understood the rhythm of their leadership, the tones of command. He silenced the officer mid-sentence. The shot passed through the alien's throat, reducing the once booming voice to a wet, choking gargle. The Varn platoon, near the wrecked transport, broke formation. Some fired wildly. Others dropped their weapons and looked to the sky for extraction. But there would be no extraction. Not yet. Cale moved to Nest 3, a cliffside position accessible only through a narrow tunnel carved into the rock. He had pre-positioned caches there, plasma packs, a hydration rig, and an auto-turret drone slaved to his signal. As he emerged onto the ledge, the war below unfolded like an ancient dance. He could almost hear the drums. 400 dead. Maybe more. The Dominion would deny the numbers. They always did. Cale had seen it on Bellin Prime. Denial first, then overcompensation. They'd try to bomb the valley soon. That meant he had maybe 20 minutes before they saturated the area with orbital plasma. He intended to make them waste every second. The wind shifted. He felt it on his skin before his sensors registered the change. A formation of Varn elites crested the opposite ridge, sleek exo-armor glinting like forged obsidian. They didn't fan out or hesitate. They advanced in a wedge, shields up, scanners burning through the fog. Professionals. Dangerous. Cale whispered, finally. He reached into the dirt beside him, drawing out a small, disc-shaped drone. With a flick, he launched it high into the air. The drone's reflective plating caught a glint of light, just enough to draw the eye. As the Varn adjusted their scans, Cale used the distraction to fire a ricochet round. It struck the drone midair, then veered off at a 45-degree angle, slamming into the side of the Varn squad leader's helmet and detonating on impact. The unit hesitated. That was all it took. Cale set off a sonic charge near the base of their formation. The blast emitted a subharmonic pitch designed to scramble the Varn's equilibrium sensors. As they staggered, weapons drooping, he picked them off one by one. 3 to the chest, 1 through the eye, another beneath the jaw. It was less like combat and more like execution. And still they came. The Varn general, commanding from orbit, barked new orders across the system-wide channel. A call for full tactical deployment. No more scouts. No more formation dances. All troops, attack. It was fear masquerading as strategy. Cale could hear it in the general's voice, strained under pride and protocol. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a reaction to humiliation, and that made them vulnerable. He moved again, crossing a narrow ravine where ancient lava tubes formed a natural trench. As he crawled toward Nest 4, Cale's muscles burned, joints stiff from the cold, breath sharp in his throat. He ignored it. Pain was temporary. Legacy was not. From his new vantage point, he watched as the final wave landed. More drop pods. Hundreds of troops. Six-legged support walkers. Airskiff. They were bringing everything. And Cale had just enough left in the tank to welcome them properly. He toggled the Deep Field Command interface on his wrist unit. The last contingency. Seismic resonance mines planted 2 kilometers out. He'd built them using spare shuttle cores, laced with magnetic shrapnel and shield-busting current pulses. The Varn surged forward, believing they had him pinned. Cale pressed the trigger. The mines didn't explode in fire. They collapsed the ground itself. 2 full Varn units vanished into the abyss, swallowed by the chasm beneath the crust. Those who remained found their footing shaky and their formations scattered. Dust clouded the air, thick enough to blind scanners. Cale fired into the chaos, aiming not to kill but to confuse, to deepen the madness. He let some live just long enough to run. Fear was his real ammunition. Then, without warning, silence returned. No movement. No comms. Cale lowered his rifle slowly, scanning the ruins of the assault. Craters smoked. Half-buried walkers twitched like broken animals. Bodies littered the plain, some intact, most not. He keyed into the Varn broadcast channel again. Nothing but static. Then, a single voice, the general. "You are one. We were thousands. What are you?" Cale stared down the ridge, where only ash and armor remained. His voice, when he finally answered, was low and calm. "I'm the consequence." He cut the channel. But he didn't move from his perch. Not yet. Because there was one last signal on the radar. Strong, deliberate, and heading straight for him. Someone had survived. And they were coming. The footsteps were heavy, measured, and deliberate, each one closer than the last. Cale lay motionless in the shadows of Nest 4, his breathing shallow, his weapon silent. The sensors confirmed what instinct already knew. Someone was alive, and they were alone. But this wasn't panic-driven retreat. This was something else. A single life form moving with direction. With purpose. He shifted his position, slow as moonlight. The rifle's scope lit with a soft hum, scanning the ridge below. And there it was. One figure. Armor like the others, but darker, an obsidian black that seemed to drink the light. No ceremonial flares. No high crests or banners. This wasn't a soldier. This was something above that. Cale knew the type. The Varn equivalent of Terran death squads. A cleaner. The figure stopped in the open, in full view, and turned its head slowly toward Cale's perch. Cale's finger hovered above the trigger. He didn't fire. The figure raised one arm and removed its helmet. The face beneath was scarred, scaled, eyes glowing a dull crimson. Not the bright arrogance of fresh troops, but the worn stare of a killer who'd survived more than they'd ever been meant to. He could see it in the structure, the expression, stood without weapon drawn, her gaze steady. Cale zoomed in. No translator pack. No vocalizer. She raised her hand and pointed to her chest, then tapped 2 fingers against her head. Understanding. Cale's grip tightened. He didn't believe in mercy. He didn't believe in ritual. But he understood this gesture. A challenge, not one of brute force but of respect. Of recognition. She had seen the massacre. Had watched her army fall apart. And still she had come. Alone. Not to kill. To finish what had been started. Cale slowly stood from his position. His joints groaned in protest, his muscles tight with fatigue. The rifle remained slung across his shoulder, but he drew no sidearm. Not yet. He stepped down from the ledge, boots crunching gravel, dust kicking up with each stride. The two met in the open, halfway between ruin and ridge. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Her hand moved first, slow and precise. A curved blade extended from her gauntlet, more ceremonial than practical. She offered it, hilt first. Cale hesitated. Then, He reached up, unlatched the magnetic lock on his chestplate, and let it fall away. The armor hit the ground like a broken tombstone. Beneath it, the old scars told their own stories, each one earned, none forgotten. He accepted the blade. The Varn warrior stepped back, unarmed, exposed. She nodded once, a silent agreement of terms. Cale understood. She wasn't here to win. She was here to make the end mean something. He approached slowly, the blade heavier than expected. It was a good weapon. Balanced. Personal. She waited. Cale raised it, then stopped just short of striking. They looked at each other. Not enemies. Not anymore. Witnesses. He lowered the blade. She exhaled, and it wasn't fear. It was release. The silence stretched between them like a bridge across history. Cale extended the blade back to her. Her hands closed around it carefully, reverently. She nodded again, and this time there was something behind it. Gratitude, perhaps, or forgiveness. She turned and walked away. No words. No threats. Just a soldier honoring the last man standing. Cale stood alone again. But it wasn't the same. The valley no longer felt cold. The silence didn't echo with ghost. Even the wind had shifted, no longer a warning but a breath of peace. He turned toward the east, where the rising light of Rigel's twin stars stretched across the horizon, painting the ruined battlefield in gold and crimson. He walked until the ridge faded behind him, until the scent of ash gave way to the smell of raw rock and distant ozone. The war had ended. Not with surrender. Not with conquest. But with a single decision not to kill. Cale didn't know if humanity still existed somewhere beyond the dead channels and silent stars. But here, on this forgotten moon, he had made himself the message. 6,000 dead. One alive. A warning. Or a monument. He reached a high bluff and sat, rifle beside him, eyes to the sky. There would be more wars, more empires. But maybe, just maybe, someone would remember this one. And think twice. The stars were moving again. Cale noticed it from the bluff, a shimmer in the upper atmosphere, barely perceptible but steady. Not drop pods. Not a fleet. Something else. A ship, massive and deliberate, descending with the quiet confidence of authority. Its silhouette stretched across the sky like a blade. He rose slowly, every nerve on alert, but not afraid. After everything, fear no longer had a place inside him. He lifted his rifle, peered through the scope, and adjusted the lens. The vessel bore no Varn insignia, no Dominion crest. It wasn't part of the invasion. It was something older, something Terran. A chill threaded through his spine. The design was unmistakable, a long, skeletal hull reinforced with black alloy plating and etched with faded Earth symbols, one of the deep-range ghost ships. The kind that vanished decades ago, sent beyond charted space and never heard from again. Projects buried under bureaucratic ash and long-forgotten treaties. And now one was here. Cale tapped his wrist console. It flickered weakly but still ran diagnostic. No hostile scans. No targeting systems active. The ship hovered, silent and still, as if waiting. Then a transmission pinged. Low-band frequency. Encrypted with an old Terran cipher Cale hadn't seen since before Bellin Prime. He hesitated for half a heartbeat, then decrypted it. Only 4 words blinked back on the screen. Draven. We found you. The air around him felt thinner. He hadn't heard his name spoken, not like that in years. Not with weight. Not with recognition. Not with the echo of home. Another ping. Extraction authorized. Confirm readiness. Cale stared at the message, unblinking. It was a lifeline, maybe. Or a trap. Or something worse, hope. He paced the bluff, eyes tracking the ship as it began its final descent, slow and silent like a ghost returning to its grave. He knew this wouldn't be simple. Nothing ever was. If Terran remnants still existed, they weren't just reaching out for reunion. They were reaching out because of what he'd done. What he'd become. The last stand at V-91 hadn't gone unnoticed. He turned his gaze to the battlefield far below, now reduced to stillness. The ruins of alien ambition. The scars of his precision. What had once been chaos was now monument, an altar of war etched into the dust. They were coming not for a survivor. They were coming for a weapon. Cale looked down at his hands. They no longer shook. But they no longer felt like his, either. Too much taken. Too much given away. Every shot fired had carved a little more of him out, left it on the field, buried under bodies and purpose. Another message blinked across his visor. ETA 120 seconds. Secure zone. He didn't move. Not yet. Behind him, something stirred, a whisper of sand displaced, too faint for any normal ear. But Cale turned instantly, rifle halfway to his shoulder, before lowering it again. It was her. The Varn warrior from before. Unarmed. Silent. She stood at the edge of the bluff, watching the approaching ship with an unreadable expression. Not fear. Not awe. Calculation, maybe. Or memory. Cale met her eyes. You followed me, he said. She didn't answer. A long pause stretched between them. Then she pointed to the ship. Slowly. Then to him. Then clenched her fist. A question, and a warning. Are you going with them? Do you know what that means? Cale didn't answer her either. The wind picked up, carrying with it the low hum of descending engines. Dust swirled around their boots. The ship hovered now, its landing struts extending, lights scanning the terrain. A hatch hissed open. Cale looked once more at the Varn woman. Her blade was gone. Her war, it seemed, was over. But not her curiosity. If you ever wonder why we survived, he said, voice low, it's because we didn't forget how to bleed. Then he turned and walked toward the ship. Each step was slower than it needed to be. Not from injury. From weight. The kind you carry when you know what waits on the other side of silence. At the hatch, a figure appeared, Terran. Armor sleek, visor drawn. The kind of soldier Cale used to be. The figure saluted. Sergeant Draven, they said. Mission parameters have changed. Command wants debrief immediately. Cale stared past them into the ship's interior. Clean. Cold. Bright lights. Long shadows. A coffin dressed as salvation. He nodded once. Understood. Behind him, the Varn warrior remained motionless. Watching. As the ramp hissed closed and the ship began to rise, Cale stood in the hold, alone among the living, and wondered, not for the first time, if returning was the same as being rescued. Because out there, on a dead moon, he had found purpose. Inside this ship, he wasn't so sure he'd find anything at all. But the war wasn't over. It was only changing shape.